I'm gonna pull out a goddamn shotgun and blow your damn head off. Do you understand, you little worthless piece of crap?
There is something uniquely unsettling about the thought of a child who kills. When an adult commits murder, we call it evil. When a child does it, we call it impossible. But history tells us otherwise. Across decades and continents, there have been children who stepped so far beyond the boundaries of innocence that the world could no longer recognize them. They were not monsters born of nightmares. They were children who laughed, who went to class, who held secrets behind calm eyes. Some were angry, some were lost. All of them crossed a line they could never return from. This is not a story about redemption or forgiveness. It is a story about the darkness that can live inside youth, about envy, loneliness, cruelty, and the search for power in a world that never seemed to notice them. These are the most evil killer kids. Columbine High School, Littleton, Colorado. It was April 20th, 1999. A Tuesday morning at Columbine High School in Littleton, Colorado. Students were joking in the cafeteria, finishing assignments, planning for prom. The day was bright, ordinary, the kind that should have ended in laughter. At 11:19 a.m., two seniors, Bennet Klebold and Eric David Harris, stepped out of their cars wearing long black trench coats. Beneath them, they carried shotguns, rifles, and homemade explosives. They had been planning what they called Judgment Day for more than a year. They filmed themselves in their basements, recorded farewell videos, and wrote detailed journals filled with hate. They wanted to be remembered. They wanted to outdo every killer before them. In those tapes, Harris stares into the camera, his smile cold. Beside him, Klebold looks uncertain, a follower searching for purpose. Harris says, "People will remember us forever." And the camera goes dark. At 11:19, they lit the first explosives near the cafeteria. The bombs failed to detonate, so they began shooting. Outside, students eating lunch heard the first cracks of gunfire. 17-year-old Rachel Scott was the first to fall. Her friend tried to run, but a second shot struck him before he reached the door. The two gunmen moved through the school with chilling calm. They fired through windows, down stairwells, into classrooms. They laughed when people screamed. Teachers locked doors and whispered for students to stay down. Some escaped through windows. Others stayed hidden under desks, praying to a god they were about to meet. For nearly 1 hour, Columbine was a battlefield. 12 students and 1 teacher were killed. 21 others were wounded. At 12:08 p.m., inside the library, Harris and Klebold turned their guns on themselves. The shooting ended where it had begun, in silence. When police finally entered, they found backpacks wired with undetonated bombs and walls marked with blood and bullet holes. The air was thick with smoke and dust. One officer said, "It looked like a war zone built by children." In the weeks that followed, America searched for meaning. Why had 2 teenage boys from stable homes done this? The media called them outcasts, goths, victims of bullying. But their own words told a different story. Eric Harris wrote about domination, about superiority, about his hatred for humanity. Dylan Klebold wrote about heartbreak, despair, and suicide. Together they became something far worse, 2 halves of destruction feeding off each other's pain. Their plan had been larger. They had hoped the cafeteria bombs would explode, collapsing the building and killing hundreds. When the explosives failed, they settled for what they could. They wanted numbers. They wanted legacy. Columbine changed everything. Before that day, the idea of a school shooting felt unthinkable. After it, lockdown drills became part of childhood. Metal detectors appeared at school entrances. Fear became routine. The media turned their faces into icons. News channels repeated their names for weeks. Some disturbed fans built websites in their honor. Others analyzed their journals like sacred texts. But the survivors, the parents, and the teachers wanted silence. They didn't want legends. They wanted their children back. In the years that followed, psychologists studied the 2 boys endlessly. Were they psychopaths? Victims of culture? Simply evil? The answers never came. What remained was a warning that rage, when left unchecked, can transform even the most ordinary faces into something unrecognizable. Eric Harris once wrote, "I hate the world because it hates me." Dylan Klebold wrote, "I just want to be free." Those sentences became epitaphs for their souls, angry words scrawled by 2 boys who mistook violence for freedom. Columbine's library was demolished and rebuilt. But memory does not obey construction. Every sound, every shadow, every fire alarm brings the day back. For those who survived, the echoes still live behind their eyes. Columbine didn't end in Littleton. It began there and spread outward like a virus. Every school that followed, every lockdown, every whisper, every siren, traces back to those 6 minutes that shook the world. They wanted to be remembered. They were. But not as heroes, not as revolutionaries, only as the children who taught the world how fragile innocence really is. And in another quiet town, hundreds of miles away, a 14-year-old boy would soon follow the same road, not with bombs or a manifesto, but with a single burst of rage that stole a child's life and his own childhood forever. His name is Josh Phillips, Jacksonville, Florida. It was November 3rd, 1998, in Jacksonville, Florida. A warm afternoon in a quiet suburban neighborhood, the kind of place where people still waved at each other across their lawns. 7-year-old Maddie Clifton lived just down the street from 14-year-old Josh Phillips. They played together sometimes, like neighbors do. But on that afternoon, Maddie never came home. When her mother realized she was missing, the entire neighborhood began searching. Dozens of people combed the streets with flashlights and flyers, calling her name into the dusk. The police searched the woods, the ponds, the nearby construction sites. For 7 days, they found nothing. Until one sound broke the silence, a faint smell and a small leak dripping from the underside of a waterbed in Josh Phillips's room. Inside, hidden under the mattress, was Maddie Clifton's body. She had been beaten, stabbed, and hidden away by the same boy who had helped look for her. Josh Phillips wasn't a stranger or a monster from the shadows. He was a freshman in high school, a boy with good grades who played baseball and video games. His family described him as shy but well-behaved. Nothing about him suggested violence. But the truth inside his bedroom told a different story. According to his confession, it began as an accident. He said Maddie came over to play baseball. When she was hit in the eye with the ball, she began crying loudly. Afraid his strict father would come home and get angry that a girl was in his room, Josh panicked. He grabbed a bat and struck her again, not once, but several times. When she continued to make noise, he took a pocket knife and stabbed her. Then, realizing what he had done, he hid her body beneath his bed and went to school the next morning, as if nothing had happened. For an entire week, he slept just a few feet above her bed. His mother even entered his room to help clean. No one knew. When investigators pulled up the waterbed, they found the air filled with decay and disbelief. Even the most seasoned detectives paused in silence. The boy sat in handcuffs, quiet and pale, unable to look anyone in the eye. At first, people refused to believe it. Neighbors called it impossible. A 14-year-old couldn't do something like that. Not here, not to a child. But as the evidence surfaced, the illusion of innocence shattered. Josh Phillips was charged as an adult with first-degree murder. During his trial, prosecutors argued that it wasn't an accident. They said his actions were deliberate. The strikes, the stabbing, the concealment. They said he had shown calculation beyond his years. The jury agreed. In 1999, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He sat motionless as the sentence was read, tears running down his face, his mother weeping beside him. He was 15 years old. For years, the case haunted Florida. Reporters replayed his confession, psychologists debated his mind, and lawmakers argued over what justice meant for a child killer. Some saw him as a boy who made a terrible mistake. Others saw him as something else, proof that evil can wear a child's face. Inside prison, Phillips changed. He earned his high school diploma, worked in the library, and mentored other inmates. He gave interviews saying he thought of Maddie every day, that the guilt never left. When the U.S. Supreme Court later ruled that mandatory life sentences for minors were unconstitutional, he became eligible for a new hearing. But the Clifton family opposed it, saying some things should never be undone. Maddie's mother said, "My daughter's never getting another chance. Why should he?" The crime remains one of Florida's most haunting, not because of its brutality, but because of its absurd closeness. 2 children, separated by 7 years. One small moment of fear and one irreversible choice. It was not planned. It was not premeditated in the way Columbine was. It was something more horrifying. A murder born from panic and selfishness, done by a boy who should have been too young to understand death. In interviews years later, Josh Phillips said, "I wish I could take it back, but "I can't." He said the silence after it happened was worse than prison itself. He said he became the monster everyone believed he was because it was easier than pretending to be a kid again. He spends his life behind bars now, surrounded by men twice his age, in a place where childhood no longer exists. He was 14 when he killed Maddie Clifton. He will likely die in prison as an old man. Outside, the Clifton home still stands. The yard where they once played is quiet. There are no bicycles, no baseball gloves, no laughter, only memory. Josh Phillips's story is not one of hate or ideology. It is about panic, immaturity, and the terrifying speed with which innocence can dissolve. A single decision made in fear, without thought, can turn a child into a killer. He wanted silence. He found it. And now the world remembers him not as the boy next door, but as the child who buried another child beneath his bed. But across the country, another boy around the same age was preparing to kill, not by accident, but by design. A student obsessed with power, knives, and control, whose cruelty would unfold inside the halls of his own school. Michael Hernandez. Miami, Florida. It was February 3rd, 2004, a Wednesday morning in Miami, Florida. The sun was rising over the city, and the students of Southwood Middle School were just beginning their day. They carried books, backpacks, and the easy confidence of 13-year-olds who believed the world was still safe. None of them could imagine that one of their classmates had been planning a murder for months. Michael Hernandez was 14 years old, quiet, intelligent, and meticulous. He wore glasses, spoke softly, and was obsessed with control. He admired serial killers, reading everything he could about them. He watched horror films not for entertainment, but for instruction. He kept a notebook, a list of names, steps, and notes about how to make history. His first target was his best friend, Jamie Goff. Jamie was kind, funny, and trusting. He walked to school with Michael almost every day. He didn't know that his friend had packed a knife that morning hidden inside a black pouch. When the first bell rang, the boys went to their first class, laughing as usual. Then Michael whispered that he had something to show him in the bathroom. Jaime followed. It was the last decision he would ever make. Inside the empty bathroom, Michael locked the door. He pulled out his knife, a serrated blade nearly 8 inches long. Without hesitation, he attacked. He stabbed Jamie over 40 times, cutting his throat so deeply that he nearly decapitated him. The attack was quick, brutal, and silent. When it was done, he washed his hands, adjusted his hair in the mirror, and walked calmly back to class. Minutes later, another student found the blood. A teacher opened the door and screamed. The hallway erupted into chaos. Police arrived within minutes. Michael stood quietly in the corner, his hands trembling only slightly. When officers asked if he knew anything, he smiled. Then he confessed. In his backpack, they found the knife, latex gloves, and a notebook labeled Death List. Inside were detailed plans, lists of potential victims, including his sister. Next to each name, he had written notes about their weaknesses and how he planned to kill them. He called it the Plan for Perfection. Detectives said he spoke about the murder like a scientist explaining an experiment. He described the attack in exact detail, how it felt, what he thought, what he wanted. He said he felt powerful and free. He showed no remorse, not even when they told him Jaime was dead. Psychologists who examined him called his case chilling. He had no history of abuse, no trauma, no mental illness that could explain it. He wasn't angry or bullied. He simply wanted to kill. He told them he was inspired by serial killers like Ted Bundy and Jeffrey Dahmer. He said he wanted to become famous, to be remembered as the youngest serial killer in history. In court, prosecutors called him a predator born without empathy. His face stayed calm, almost detached, as the photos of Jamie's body were shown. His mother wept uncontrollably. His father sat in silence, staring at the floor. When the verdict was read, guilty of first-degree murder, Michael showed no reaction. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole. He was 14 years old. Inside prison, he continued to write. He kept journals about his thoughts, about new ideas for killings, about how the media misunderstood him. He told other inmates that he would finish the list if he ever got out. He never did. Years later, when new laws allowed juvenile lifers to request resentencing, Michael appeared before a judge again. He was older now, but his words were the same. He apologized, but it sounded rehearsed, empty, mechanical. The judge denied his release. He remains behind bars, still talking about control, still analyzing death. The story of Michael Hernandez is not about revenge or anger. It's about obsession, a fascination with death so cold it feels inhuman. He didn't kill because of rage or fear. He killed because he wanted to see what it felt like. The bathroom where it happened has since been remodeled, but teachers still avoid it. Students whisper about the ghost of Kwame Goff. Every year on the anniversary, flowers appear near the restroom door. No one knows who leaves them. Michael Hernandez represents the most terrifying kind of evil. One that doesn't come from trauma, but from curiosity. A child who wanted to feel like God, and instead became a cautionary tale. Jamie Goff's family never moved away. His mother still keeps his baseball glove on a shelf in the living room. She once said, "He trusted his friend. That's what hurts the most." And maybe that is the heart of this story. Not just the cruelty of the act, but the betrayal that made it possible. A killer who smiled while walking beside his victim, knowing what he would do next. He was 14 years old, and his name is now carved into history, not as a student, not as a friend, but as a reminder that evil doesn't need age to exist. And far across the ocean, another teenager was preparing for murder. A boy who believed he was chosen, who said the devil spoke to him, and who turned his hometown in England into a nightmare. This is James Fairweather, Colchester, Essex, England. It was early spring in Colchester, a quiet town in Essex, England. Rows of red brick houses, trimmed hedges, and streets where nothing truly bad ever seemed to happen. The town was peaceful, ordinary, safe. But in March of 2014, that peace was broken by something unthinkable. The first body was found near Castle Park. 33-year-old James Atfield, a man with learning disabilities, lay sprawled in the grass, his hands reaching toward the edge of the riverbank as if for help that never came. He had been stabbed more than 100 times. The attack was savage, chaotic, and deliberate. There was no sign of robbery, no sign of struggle, just relentless violence. Detectives stood in stunned silence. Even seasoned officers said they had never seen such cruelty. For weeks, the town locked its doors. Headlines screamed of a killer at large. Mothers walked their children to school, with eyes that never stopped scanning the streets. And when the police could find no answers, the whispers began, that maybe this wasn't human at all, that only something truly evil could have done what was done. 2 months later, another body appeared. 31-year-old Nahid Al-Manea, a Saudi Arabian student at the local university, was walking along a footpath on her way to class. She wore a hijab, carried her books against her chest, and was stabbed 16 times in a pattern nearly identical to the first victim. She died within moments. Witnesses saw a figure in a dark hood sprinting from the scene. That figure was a 15-year-old boy named James Fairweather. At home, Fairweather was quiet, withdrawn, and angry. He lived with his parents in a small council house and spent most of his time locked in his room, playing violent video games and scrolling through online forums about serial killers. He idolized murderers like the Yorkshire Ripper and Ted Bundy. He memorized their crimes, studied their interviews, and dreamed of following in their footsteps. He told classmates that he wanted to kill for fun, but no one took him seriously. He was just the weird kid, shy, strange, and forgettable. He carried a knife everywhere, hidden beneath his jacket. He said he heard voices, a dark whisper that told him who to kill and when. He claimed the devil was speaking through him, promising fame and control. For him, murder was not revenge, it was destiny. After the second killing, Colchester changed overnight. Police flooded the streets. More than 100 detectives were assigned to the case. They analyzed hundreds of knives, interviewed strangers, scoured parks, rivers, and alleys. But the killer kept vanishing into the crowd. He was invisible, just a boy blending in. For nearly a year, Fairweather watched from the sidelines. He visited the crime scenes at night, tracing his steps, staring at the spots where his victims had fallen. He read every newspaper article, smiled at his own anonymity, and planned his next attack. He believed he was untouchable, but arrogance always leaves a trail. In May of 2015, 14 months after the first murder, a local resident walking his dog noticed a hooded teenager crouching near a path in the woods. The same path where Nahid had been killed. The boy was clutching a knife, whispering to himself. When police arrived, he didn't run. He simply looked up and said, "You finally found me." He was arrested on the spot. In his bag, officers found gloves, a mask, and a hunting knife still stained with blood. At the station, he confessed without hesitation. He told detectives that killing made him feel powerful, that he loved the look of fear in his victims' eyes. He said the first murder made him feel like God. During questioning, he laughed several times. He said he had planned a third attack that day but was interrupted. Psychiatrists called him cold, calculating, and narcissistic. He claimed to hear voices, but doctors said his so-called demons were nothing more than an excuse for pleasure. In court, Fairweather sat expressionless as prosecutors read every detail. He refused to look at the families of the victims. When the verdict was delivered, guilty of both murders, he smiled faintly. He was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 27 years. He was 16 years old. Nahid's brother called him the devil with a schoolboy face. Detectives said they would never forget the sight of a child describing murder like a hobby. One officer said, "We looked for a monster, we found a boy." Colchester changed forever. The paths where the killings took place now have cameras and floodlights. The park closes early, but every quiet night, the memory of those murders still hangs in the air. Parents walk faster, strangers look over their shoulders, and the town remembers that the most dangerous people can look ordinary. Fairweather's name has faded from the headlines, but not from the nightmares of those who survived that year. He remains behind bars, serving a life sentence. In his mind, he achieved what he wanted. He became someone people would remember. But what he never understood was that fame built on blood is not power, it is rot. He wanted to be a legend. He became a warning, a reminder that evil doesn't always come with age. Sometimes it wears a school uniform and walks home past police tape. And while England mourned, thousands of miles away across the Atlantic, another teenager, broken by isolation and haunted by grief, was preparing his own massacre. A boy from a reservation in Minnesota who carried his pain to school and unleashed it on everyone in his path. Red Lake, Minnesota. It was March 21st, 2005, in the remote northern community of Red Lake, Minnesota, a reservation town surrounded by pine trees and frozen lakes, isolated, quiet, and heavy with the kind of silence that holds secrets. Life there was simple. People fished, hunted, went to school, prayed, and mourned together. Everyone knew everyone. That morning, no one imagined that a 16-year-old boy was about to turn their small world into a nightmare. Jeff Weise was different from most of his classmates. Tall, pale, always dressed in black. He spoke little, smiled less, and preferred his own company. He drew constantly, images of skulls, soldiers, and worlds on fire. He wrote stories about killing and about the apocalypse. Teachers saw him as shy, a little lost, but never dangerous. They were wrong. Jeff had lived a life of tragedy long before the shooting began. His father had taken his own life when Jeff was 8 years old. His mother had suffered a brain injury in a car crash and was institutionalized. He moved in with his grandfather, Darrell Lucier, a respected tribal police officer, and his grandfather's partner, Michelle Sagana. He rarely saw his parents again. Isolation became his normal. At school, he was bullied for his looks, his clothes, and his quietness. Classmates called him names, mocked his drawings, and pushed him in the halls. He laughed it off in public, but at home, his anger grew. He spent long hours online under the name Toda Sengel, Angel of Death. He posted on forums devoted to violence and fascism, praising the Columbine shooters and writing that they were true warriors. His loneliness evolved into obsession. He collected violent images, wrote about death, and fantasized about revenge. No one stopped him. No one asked why. And every day, his hatred found new roots. On the morning of the massacre, Jeff woke early. He dressed entirely in black, boots, trench coat, gloves, and a bulletproof vest taken from his grandfather's closet. He loaded his weapons, a police-issued Glock pistol, a shotgun, and several magazines of ammunition. At 2:30 in the afternoon, he walked into his grandfather's bedroom and shot him once in the head. Then he killed Michelle Sagana in the living room. He took the patrol car and drove toward Red Lake High School. At 2:48, he arrived. The camera above the school's front entrance recorded his every step. He got out of the car, raised his shotgun, and fired through the glass doors. The first victim was security guard Derek Brunn. Then he moved down the hallway, reloading as he walked. He killed 5 students and 1 teacher. He injured 5 more. Witnesses said he was calm, methodical, expressionless. He fired at anyone who moved, and when the police entered the building, he turned the gun on himself. The entire massacre lasted less than 10 minutes. When officers reached the scene, the halls were filled with smoke, alarms blaring, the smell of gunpowder thick in the air. Bodies lay near lockers, backpacks still open, textbooks scattered across the floor. A clock on the wall had stopped at 2:58. 10 people were dead, including Jeff Weise. 10 lives lost in a place that had already known too much death. Investigators searched his room that night. They found Nazi drawings on the walls, burned CDs, and notes about his hatred for humanity. He had written, "I'm sick of being alive. I'm sick of the world. No one will ever forget me." He had been planning the shooting for months. The police later confirmed that he had warned classmates something was coming, but no one believed him. For Red Lake, the tragedy was more than just another school shooting. It was a wound layered upon generations of pain, poverty, addiction, trauma, and loss. The community had already faced one of the highest youth suicide rates in the country. Jeff became another chapter in that unending grief. At the memorial, tribal elders burned sage and prayed for the souls of the dead. Parents wept openly. Children clung to each other in silence. The gymnasium overflowed with candles and photographs. 10 coffins stood in a row, each draped in white fabric, each surrounded by flowers. The smell of cedar and smoke filled the air. Teachers spoke of the students they had lost. One described a boy who wanted to be a doctor. Another remembered a girl who used to draw beside Jeff, never knowing what he was really drawing. And in the back of the room, an empty chair sat for him, not in honor, but in acknowledgement, because his pain too belonged to them. Jeff Weise was not a monster born of nothing. He was a child of neglect, trauma, and silence. He looked for purpose and found only anger. He looked for connection and found only screens. He looked for love and found only ghosts. In the end, he made the world feel the emptiness that had consumed him for years. The Red Lake School has since been rebuilt, brighter and safer, but memory is harder to rebuild. Every March, families gather at the site. They light candles, speak the names of the victims, and whisper prayers in the Ojibwe language. They do not say Jeff's name aloud, but they do not deny it either. Because understanding him, even in horror, is part of understanding how to stop the next one. Jeff Weise wanted power. He wanted to be remembered. What remains is not power, but sorrow, a quiet lesson carved into a small northern town. 10 people gone, hundreds scarred, and one more community that learned evil can wear the face of a lonely child. And far from Minnesota, another child, a 15-year-old girl who smiled sweetly and spoke softly, was preparing to kill not out of rage but curiosity. She wanted to know what it felt like to take a life, and she would find out in the woods behind her own home. Jefferson City, Missouri. It was October 21st, 2009, in Jefferson City, Missouri, a small Midwestern town surrounded by quiet woods and winding dirt roads. The air was cool, the trees beginning to change, and 13-year-old Elizabeth Olton was walking home from a friend's house just a few doors down. She was laughing, carrying her school bag, thinking of homework and television. It should have been a 5-minute walk. She never made it. When she didn't come home, her mother began to panic. Neighbors joined the search with flashlights, calling her name into the trees. Police brought in dogs and helicopters, searching through the woods that bordered the neighborhood. Hours passed, then days, but Elizabeth had vanished into the dark. 3 days later, the search ended. Her body was found buried in a shallow grave just a few hundred feet from her own home, her wrists slit, her throat cut, her body covered in leaves. The killer was not a stranger. It was 15-year-old Alyssa Bustamante, a quiet blonde teenager who lived right next door. At first glance, Alyssa looked like any other high school girl. She took selfies, listened to music, laughed with friends, but behind that mask was a fascination with death that had been growing for years. Her journals were filled with drawings of graves, skulls, and bleeding hearts. She had tried to take her own life at 11. Afterward, she was prescribed antidepressants but never received consistent therapy. She told classmates she was addicted to pain. Alyssa was clever, detached, and curious about darkness. She wrote in her diary about wanting to know what it felt like to kill. And 1 week before Elizabeth disappeared, she dug 2 graves in the woods near her house, side by side, waiting. On that October evening, she saw Elizabeth walking by and called out to her. The little girl trusted her, followed her toward the trees, and never came back. Alyssa strangled her with her bare hands, then used a knife to cut her throat. She dragged the body to the grave she had already prepared and covered it with leaves and soil. Then she walked home, washed up, and went to a school dance. When police questioned her days later, she was calm, even bored. She said she didn't know anything. But officers noticed scratches on her arms and dirt beneath her fingernails. They found a notebook in her room that changed everything. On one page, written in large, uneven letters, she had described the murder. "I just fucking killed someone. I strangled them and slit their throat and I'd stabbed them. Now I'm dead tired. It was amazing." At the end, she drew a smiley face. When detectives read that aloud in court, the room fell silent. Elizabeth's mother screamed. Alyssa sat motionless, her eyes fixed on the floor. She confessed soon after, describing how she had planned the murder in advance, how she wanted to see what it felt like. She said she didn't know why she picked Elizabeth. She was just there. It wasn't personal, it was curiosity. Psychologists later described Alyssa as highly intelligent but emotionally detached. She showed signs of depression and personality disorder, but they said she knew exactly what she was doing. She wasn't insane, she was cold. In 2012, she pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and armed criminal action. She was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole. Her attorney argued that she was just a child, that her mind wasn't fully formed, but the prosecutor called her a calculating predator who planned death like an experiment. Inside prison, Alyssa changed her story several times, sometimes apologizing, sometimes insisting she had been pressured into confessing. But the journal, the graves, the calmness, none of it could be denied. Elizabeth Olten's family never recovered. Her mother said, "A child murdered my child. There's no healing from that." Her bedroom was left untouched for years, her dolls arranged exactly as she had left them. Alyssa's case became a national obsession. People wanted to know how a 15-year-old could commit such a brutal act with no emotion, no motive, and no remorse. But the answer, perhaps, is the simplest and the most terrifying. Because she wanted to. She was not driven by anger or revenge. She was driven by curiosity, the darkest kind of curiosity, the kind that strips away empathy, until killing becomes an idea worth testing. In her later interviews, she said, "I don't know why I did it. I thought I wanted to feel something, but I didn't." That emptiness was all that remained. Today, Alyssa Bustamante sits in a women's prison in Missouri, still young, still unrepentant. She may one day walk free, but the world outside her cell has changed. Her name has become a warning, proof that evil can grow in silence, behind smiles, in the hearts of children who never learn what empathy means. The woods where she buried Elizabeth are still there, though no one walks them at night anymore. Sometimes flowers appear at the edge of the clearing, left by strangers who never knew the girl, but feel the weight of what was lost there. But in another part of America, far from Missouri's forests, a boy was preparing for something equally dark. A 15-year-old driven by faith, delusion, and an obsession with the apocalypse. He believed he was chosen to cleanse his family of sin, and when his moment came, he didn't hesitate. Nehemiah Griego. Albuquerque, New Mexico. It was January 19, 2013, in the desert outskirts of Albuquerque, New Mexico. The night sky was clear, the air cold and still. Inside a modest home on a quiet stretch of highway, 15-year-old Nehemiah Griego was awake long before dawn. He wasn't doing homework or sneaking video games, he was loading guns. Nehemiah was the son of Greg Griego, a respected pastor and former jail chaplain. His father was known for his deep faith, his kindness, and his work with troubled inmates. His mother, Sarah, homeschooled the children, raising them with strict discipline and prayer. To everyone who knew them, they seemed like the perfect family, loving, religious, and close. But behind the walls of that home, something darker was growing. Nehemiah was quiet, moody, and often withdrawn. He loved heavy metal music and war video games. He talked about death more than other kids. His friends said he sometimes spoke about killing, but always in a joking way, until one day, it wasn't a joke anymore. That night, while his family slept, Nehemiah retrieved a .22 rifle from his parents' closet. He walked into his mother's bedroom first. She was lying in bed, still half asleep, when he raised the gun and shot her in the head. She never had time to scream. Then he turned toward his 9-year-old brother, Zephaniah, and shot him too. His younger sisters, Jael, aged 5, and Angel, aged 2, were crying. He killed them both. He then waited in the hallway, calm, patient, as his father returned home from a late-night volunteer shift. When Greg stepped through the door, Nehemiah raised the rifle again and fired several times. The pastor fell dead in his own entryway. It was over in minutes. 5 people, his entire family. Afterward, Nehemiah changed into clean clothes, grabbed his father's AR-15 rifle, and drove to his church in the family van. He told a security guard that his family had been killed, leaving out that he was the one who had done it. When police arrived, he confessed immediately. He said he had been thinking about it for days. He said he wanted to kill as many people as possible. Investigators were stunned. They found no drugs, no sign of abuse, no external motive. The murders were not an explosion of rage. They were deliberate, planned, executed with precision. When asked why, Nehemiah said he was angry at his mother and wanted to see what it felt like to kill. He said he thought his family would go to heaven and that he might join the military afterward. His words were flat, emotionless. Detectives described it as chilling calm. Neighbors could not comprehend it. The Griegos had been admired in their community. Greg's ministry had helped countless people rebuild their lives. Now, the same name that once meant faith and compassion was being spoken in whispers of horror. Psychologists later described Nehemiah as emotionally detached, intelligent, and deeply conflicted. He expressed both guilt and pride, saying he was sorry, but also that the murders made him feel strong. One doctor noted that he seemed to have fantasies of heroism mixed with a fascination with killing. His extended family struggled between grief and disbelief. Some begged for mercy, saying he was still a child, broken by inner torment. Others demanded justice, saying the murders were too brutal to forgive. The courtroom became a war between sorrow and anger. Nehemiah was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder for his parents and 3 counts of child abuse resulting in death for his siblings. He was only 15, but prosecutors tried him as an adult. In 2019, he was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 30 years. By then, he had become a quiet, polite young man, still religious, still claiming to talk to God. He told the court, "I can't take back what I did. I wish I could." But for many, the apology was too late, too soft, too hollow. The house where the killings happened stood empty for years. The walls were eventually torn down, the ground leveled, but neighbors say they can still feel the weight of that night every time they drive past. 5 crosses stand near the edge of the property, 1 for each life lost. No one visits them more than once. The story of Nehemiah Griego is one of contradiction. He was both victim and villain, raised in faith yet consumed by darkness. He came from love yet chose destruction. He was proof that evil can bloom even in the most pious homes, that the distance between innocence and damnation is smaller than we think. At 15 years old, he destroyed 5 lives. At 15, he became one more reminder that the face of evil can be young, soft-spoken, and smiling. And hundreds of miles away, another teenager would soon walk a similar path. A 16-year-old boy from Pennsylvania whose crimes would blur the line between impulse and cruelty, and whose name would become a quiet legend of horror. His name is Marcus Rutter. York, Pennsylvania. It was December 31st, 2015, New Year's Eve in York, Pennsylvania. The streets were covered in frost, the air filled with fireworks and laughter. But inside a small, dimly lit home on Cleveland Avenue, 16-year-old Marcus Rutter was not celebrating. He was loading a gun. Marcus had always seemed like an ordinary teenager, quiet, a bit withdrawn, but polite. He lived with his mother and younger siblings. His father was in and out of prison, his presence more myth than memory. By the time Marcus was 13, he had already seen more violence than most adults. Gunshots in the distance, sirens in the night, those sounds were normal. So, when a friend offered him a pistol, Marcus said yes. He began carrying it everywhere, tucked into his waistband, even when he had nowhere to go. It made him feel safe. It made him feel powerful. And soon, power became the only thing he wanted. On that cold December night, Marcus met up with two friends, both teenagers, both bored, both looking for trouble. They walked the streets aimlessly, talking about parties and girls and money. Then one of them suggested they rob someone. It was supposed to be easy, just a bit of quick cash before midnight. But the night was about to turn into something far darker. Their target was a man named Anthony Faison, a 20-year-old they barely knew. He was friendly, outgoing, and worked at a local warehouse. When he agreed to meet Marcus near the railroad tracks to hang out, he didn't know he was walking into an ambush. As Anthony approached, Marcus raised his pistol. The first shot missed. The second hit Anthony in the chest. He fell instantly. The other boys panicked and ran, but Marcus stood over the body, breathing heavily, watching the blood spread across the ground. He fired again, then fled into the dark. The fireworks began minutes later, echoing through the city, the sound of celebration blending with the sound of death. When police found the body, they assumed it was gang-related. They had no idea the killer was a 16-year-old who barely understood what he had done. Marcus tried to act normal afterward. He went home, ate dinner, and watched television with his mother. When detectives knocked on his door days later, he didn't run. He sat on the couch, calm, quiet, and asked what took them so long. At first, he denied everything, but when confronted with a witness statement and shell casings that matched his gun, he began to cry. Not out of guilt, out of fear. He said, "It just happened. I didn't mean to shoot him." The truth was simpler. He wanted to feel in control. For once in his life, Marcus Rutter wanted to be the one people feared, and for a few minutes that night, he got what he wanted. In court, prosecutors described him as emotionless, cold, and unpredictable. They said he had laughed about the killing afterward, that he bragged to friends about putting someone down. His defense attorney argued that Marcus was not a hardened killer, just a scared, damaged kid shaped by a world of violence. Both things could be true. At 16, Marcus was tried as an adult. He was found guilty of second-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without parole. His mother wept in the courtroom, begging the judge to remember that her son was still a child. The judge replied softly, "So was the victim." Years later, after the Supreme Court banned mandatory life sentences for juveniles, Marcus was resentenced to a term that would allow for parole after 40 years. He will be in his mid-50s if he ever walks free. Inside prison, he spends his time reading and working in the kitchen. He has said in interviews that he thinks about Anthony Faison every day. He said, "I wish I could tell him I was sorry, but sorry doesn't fix anything." His story is one of tragedy on both sides. A boy born into violence who became the violence himself. In another world, with another start, he might have been something else. A student, a father, a man with a future. Instead, he is one more face in the long line of children who mistook a weapon for identity. The streets where it happened have changed. The tracks are quiet now. Graffiti covers the wall where Anthony died. Sometimes, locals leave flowers there on New Year's Eve. Silent reminders of the night the laughter turned into mourning. Marcus Rutter's life ended the moment he pulled that trigger, even though he still breathes. His victim's family visits the grave every year. His mother writes letters to a son who will never come home. Two families destroyed in a single heartbeat. He was 16, Anthony was 20. One young man buried in the ground, the other buried alive in prison walls. The story of Marcus Rutter is not about hate, it is about emptiness, the kind that grows when love disappears and violence becomes the only language left. And while Pennsylvania grieved, another boy hundreds of miles south was walking the same road, a teenager from Texas whose rage erupted in his own home, turning an argument into a massacre. Victor Nathaniel Rivas. Houston, Texas. It was February 21st, 2022, in Houston, Texas. A warm evening fading into darkness. On a quiet suburban street, police lights flickered against the pale brick of a single-story home. Inside, officers found a scene so brutal that even the most seasoned among them stopped to catch their breath. Two bodies, a mother and her 4-year-old daughter. And the person who had taken their lives was only 17 years old, Victor Nathaniel Rivas. Victor had grown up in that same house. Neighbors described him as polite, shy and soft-spoken. He helped his mother with groceries, played video games, and waved to people walking by. Nothing about him suggested the violence that was coming. But behind his quiet demeanor was anger. Years of it. His parents had divorced when he was younger. He struggled in school, often skipping classes and spending hours online. He had few friends, no girlfriend, and little direction. Police records later showed minor incidents, curfew violations, fights, nothing serious enough to predict murder. But rage doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it grows quietly, waiting for the right spark. That spark came in the form of an argument. On the night of the killings, Victor's mother confronted him about skipping school and failing classes. Voices rose, walls shook, and somewhere in the chaos, something inside him broke. He stormed out, retrieved a gun, and came back inside. The argument continued, and then silence. Victor shot his mother multiple times before turning the weapon on his younger sister, a 4-year-old girl named Leilani. She died instantly. He left them both where they fell and fled into the night. Hours later, when police arrived, they followed a trail of blood that led to the bodies. The officers could barely speak as they described the scene in their reports. A mother in her 40s, a child barely old enough for kindergarten, both killed by someone they had loved without condition. A statewide manhunt began immediately. Victor's photo spread across the news. A teenager with long hair, dark eyes, and a blank expression. For 2 days, he evaded capture. He was eventually found hiding in a relative's house, lying on the floor with a pistol beside him. He did not resist arrest. When questioned, he confessed calmly. He said, "I don't know why I did it. I was angry. I just snapped." Detectives later said it was one of the most emotionless confessions they had ever heard. He did not cry. He did not tremble. He simply explained the murders as though describing something that had happened to someone else. At 17, he was charged as an adult with 2 counts of capital murder. The district attorney called it a crime beyond comprehension. The community, already shocked, struggled to make sense of it. How could a boy who seemed so ordinary, so quiet, commit such an act of horror? Psychologists who later studied the case pointed to a pattern: isolation, resentment, emotional immaturity, and easy access to weapons. Victor had been struggling silently for years, but no one knew how deep the anger ran. He had once told a friend that he felt invisible, that no one cared if he lived or died, that he sometimes imagined ending everything. No one took it seriously. They thought it was teenage drama. It wasn't. In court, Victor barely spoke. He kept his head down, hands folded, eyes empty. Prosecutors described him as a storm of quiet rage. They read text messages he had sent in the days before the murders, messages filled with bitterness toward his family, resentment toward his life. The jury listened in silence. When the verdict came, there was no surprise. He was found guilty of capital murder and sentenced to life in prison without parole. He will die behind bars long after the world has forgotten his name. His surviving relatives refused to attend the sentencing. His aunt told reporters, "We lost 3 people that day. My sister, my niece, and the boy we thought we knew." For her, forgiveness was impossible. The tragedy of Victor Nathaniel Rivas is almost unbearable in its simplicity, a moment of rage that destroyed generations. There was no plan, no ideology, no delusion, just anger, loneliness, and a gun within reach. Today, the house where it happened sits empty. The grass grows high, the windows are covered, and no one moves in. Neighbors cross the street when they pass it. At night, the wind rattles the fence and carries with it the faint echo of what happened inside. Rage like Victor's doesn't explode without warning. It builds, quietly, beneath the surface of silence and misunderstanding. And sometimes, when it finally erupts, it takes with it everyone nearby. He was 17 years old, his mother was 47, his sister was 4, and in a single night, he turned love into loss. But as Victor began his life sentence, another young killer was already walking the same path. A teenager from California whose fascination with death went beyond impulse or rage. Daniel William Marsh didn't kill by accident or outburst. He studied it, practiced it, perfected it. Davis, California. It was April 14th, 2013, in Davis, California, a small, peaceful college town surrounded by fields and sunlight, the kind of place where crime was rare, and everyone felt safe leaving their doors unlocked. But behind one of those unlocked doors, death was waiting, and its messenger was 15 years old. Daniel William Marsh was, at first glance, an ordinary high school student. Thin, quiet, artistic. He wore dark clothes, listened to metal, and spent hours drawing. Teachers described him as smart, even gifted, but behind his calm exterior, something monstrous was growing. Daniel had struggled with depression for years. He was bullied, isolated, and diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. He had been hospitalized twice for suicidal thoughts, but his darkness didn't fade. It evolved. Instead of wanting to die, he began to wonder what it might feel like to kill. He fantasized about it constantly. He told friends that he dreamed of murder, that he felt powerful when thinking about taking a life. He described vivid details, the blood, the screams, the control. They thought he was joking. He wasn't. One night, while scrolling online, Daniel discovered videos about serial killers. He studied their methods, read their manifestos, and began calling himself the psychopath. He wrote in his journal that he wanted to feel what real death was like. Then he started planning. On April 14th, just after midnight, he put on black gloves, a mask, and a hooded sweatshirt. He armed himself with a hunting knife and walked out into the cool California night. His heart was steady. His mind was calm. He told investigators later that it felt amazing. He wandered through his neighborhood until he found an unlocked door at a small single-story house. Inside lived an elderly couple, Oliver Northup, aged 87, and Claudia Maupin, aged 76. They were asleep in their bed. Daniel entered quietly, his footsteps almost soundless. Then he began to kill. He stabbed Oliver, first waking Claudia with the sound. She screamed, but he turned the knife on her, stabbing again and again. He slit their throats and mutilated their bodies, cutting deep wounds into their chests. Afterward, he stood there for several minutes, just watching. He told police later it was pure euphoria. Then he left the house, wiping the knife on his sleeve, and walked home. He slept soundly that night. For 2 months, the murders went unsolved. Police found no fingerprints, no witnesses, no motive. The community was terrified. 2 beloved grandparents slaughtered in their bed. Doors that had once stayed open were locked tight. People whispered about demons, about evil, about madness. But the killer was right there, going to school, sitting in class, smiling when asked about the murders. He even bragged about it to a few friends, saying he had done something big. Most laughed. One finally told police. Daniel was brought in for questioning in June. At first, he denied everything. Then detectives mentioned DNA, his blood found at the scene. He leaned back in his chair, smirked, and said, "Fine, I did it." His confession was chillingly detailed. He described each stab, each scream, each feeling. He said it was better than sex. When asked if he regretted it, he said no. He told them he was proud. He said he had wanted to kill again, that he was already planning his next victims. Psychologists who interviewed him were stunned. They called him a true psychopath, a child without empathy or conscience. He had no trauma to explain it, no abuse, no rage, no survival story. He killed because he wanted to know what it felt like, and he liked it. In court, prosecutors described him as evil beyond comprehension. The jury watched his videotaped confession in silence. At the end, one juror wept. Another said he enjoyed it too much. Daniel showed no reaction as the verdict was read, guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to 52 years to life in prison. He was 16 years old. In later years, he tried to have his sentence reduced, arguing that his mental illness made him incapable of understanding right from wrong. The court rejected it. The judge said simply, "You understood enough to enjoy it." The house where Oliver and Claudia died has long since been sold, but neighbors say no one stays there for long. Some claim to hear whispers at night. Others say the lights flicker at the same hour the murders occurred. Whether true or not, the fear remains. Daniel William Marsh sits in a cell now, drawing pictures of demons and blades. He still calls himself the psychopath. He told one reporter, "I feel nothing. I never did." And maybe that is what makes him so terrifying. Not the violence itself, but the void behind it. He was 15 years old. They were 87 and 76, 3 generations apart, yet bound forever by one act of unimaginable cruelty. There are names that fade with time, and there are names that stain it forever. The children in these stories, from Columbine to Davis, remind us that evil doesn't always arrive fully grown. Sometimes it begins small, fragile, innocent, until one day it finds a way to break free. These stories are not told to glorify. They are told to remember, to understand that darkness can take root anywhere, even in the hearts of the young. Every victim left behind families, dreams, and futures that should have continued. And every killer, once a child, became a warning, a reflection of what happens when pain turns into power and innocence turns into something unrecognizable. If there's one truth that echoes through them all, it's this: evil doesn't always wear a mask. Sometimes it looks like a neighbor, a classmate, a friend. Which story haunted you the most? Tell me in the comments, which of these killer kids do you believe was the most horrifying, and why? Thank you for watching. Stay safe, stay aware, and never forget, even in the quietest places, the human heart can hide the loudest darkness. If you want more stories that explore the shadows of true crime and human nature, subscribe, because the next story might be closer than you think.